everyone. So we can start this course. So it has several parts, as you can see. The first part is about the Linux, how to use Linux, especially on our HPC cluster. Then my colleague Birgitte will talk about how to use the cluster and also a brief introduction of HPC2N. And finally, for the final part, I will talk about the most common software and how to submit your jobs to the HPC2N cluster. So let me share my screen. So Birgitte sent an email to you with the most important information for this course. And one of the points was about the Git repository. So in the Git repository, we put the examples and also the presentations for this course. And here you can see the two sections, the slides and the hands-ons. And for the first part, I will talk about these slides for a Linux commands. And then we will move to the folder hands-ons, which contains the exercises and the examples for this course. So you can clone this repository with the git clone command. So either if you are on your local machine or if you know how to log in already to Kebnekaise, or you can watch the files online as I'm doing right now. So let me go here to the intro course and the slides section. And here you can see the first lecture, which will be on Linux. And essentially we'll follow this presentation. So my name is Pedro Ojeda. I'm working as an application expert at HPC2N, and my colleague is also taking part in this course is Birgitte Britzu, and she will talk about the HPC2N clusters later on. So these are the essential parts that you need to know in order to use the cluster. So the cluster has the Linux operating system, and because of that, one cannot do the common things as in other operating systems like Macintosh or Windows, where you click on an application or you click on some file and you move it around. So in this type of operating system, you need to use commands in order to get a good workflow. So first of all, what is the Linux? So these are the several components of the computer. So we can find some inner shell, which is the hardware. And then here we can find the kernel, which essentially is the Linux kernel. And it controls or it allows you to interact with the hardware, the peripherals. And there is also a layer called the shell. In particular, at HPC2N, we use the bash shell. And this allows you to interact with the kernel without having to recompile that every time that you use that, especially when you are calling some functions from the kernel. And in the latest or the other most layer, we can find the compilers and the packages, for instance, R, GrowMax, and MATLAB. And this is the the layer where we will move today. So Linux is a Unix-like operating systems. So it can be found in many devices now, like the Android smartphones, or in any almost in any HPC center. Yes, this is the default operating system. And the good point is that once you learn the commands in Linux, you can use them in almost any other Unix-like operating system because the difference is small. So a brief description of the Linux timeline. It started with a Unix operating system, and then it was branched into several Unix families. So this is the one that we will talk about today, but as I said before, the commands are essentially the same in the other operating systems. The main difference when you use Linux instead of Mac or Windows is that here everything moves around the terminal. And you will see that later on when you log into Kebnekaise. So this terminal will allow you to control or, or to manipulate your files in your account. And here at this point, we can find the prompt, and this is the place where you will type your commands. So in Linux, there are different type of files, and some of them are directories, some of them are soft links, some of them are pure text files. Like here, for instance, I'm using the tree command, which allows you to display the content of the folder where you are currently sitting, and it shows you that in a branch way. So here you can see the directories and also the regular files. These are the files that I use to prepare the current presentation. So the most important command that I can talk here for this basic course is the man command. So man will allow you to look at the entire information of some command. In this case, I'm looking at the manual of the nano command, which is a text editor. It's quite convenient when we are studying in Linux because it's easy to use. There are not so many shortcuts that you use, just the basic one to save the file, to write the file, right? And it can be found in any, almost in any HPC center by default. So with man, you can see all the options. Sometimes it's a bit technical, but there are times when you need to do something specific with the command. Um, that you are currently targeting, and then man, it's a good place to look at. Very important how to navigate the system. In the beginning, I said that in Windows, if you want to move, for instance, one file from one folder to another folder, we just click on the file with the mouse and then select the file, copy, and then go to the folder and paste that, right? In some Linux distributions, that is possible, but you will see that it's not that convenient where you have plenty of files, especially for research, yes? And you will discover that navigating through the files on the terminal, it's more convenient because it's more powerful. So how to move around, how to navigate this file? Uh, the first thing that we can do is to look at the files that are in the current directory. And for this, we use the ls command. And ls with the plain command will show you the content. In the present case, I had just one folder called 1CD9. So we can enhance the power of this command by adding more options. If you look at the man ls output, you will see that ls allows you to include other switches so that the power of this command is enhanced. So here, for instance, instead of the plain ls, I use ls minus l, which show you detailed information of the content of the folder. And if I use ls minus la, I will also list the hidden files in the directory. And ls minus lah will show you also the size of the file in a human readable way. Here I need to say some comments about these letters here, which refer to the file permissions. In Linux, there are file permissions for the user. The user is the one that is in the account, yes, as you will receive in HPC2N. And then there is an option to make a group of users. And this is convenient for some software where the license is only granted for some group of people, for instance. And the last letters, the last three letters, refer to the others. So what other people can do to your work. So these are divided in blocks of three. The first three refers to the user, the next three refers to the group, and the last three refer to the others. This first letter, D, refers to the type of file that it is. In this case, it's D, it means it's a directory. If we have a plain file, this will be shown here. So, for instance, here, by adding or by listing the content of the file, which has a plain text file, you will see that instead of D, it shows a minus, a dash sign. So in my current workflow, what I use is this command, ls minus lh rt, which lists the files according to the time where they appear, but the latest modified files appear at the bottom. So imagine that you have many crystal structure files, for instance, and you want to know what are the files that you modify in the previous day, for instance, or in the previous hour. So you can use this command to list the most recent modified files, right? So you see that the power of ls command increase a lot by adding more flags. But it's also not very convenient to type this long command all the time. So I will show you later on how to do a shortcut so that you can use that always. So I have shown you that the sequence of 3 letters tells you the permissions about the user here with a shortcut of U, the group, and the others referred to. So this sequence of 3 letters can be either reading the file, writing the file, or executing the file. So for instance, in my previous slide, you can see that this file for the first 3 letters, which refer to the user, have the reading and the writing permissions, but not the executable, right? It's not executable. It's just a file that I can read and write. And the next 3 letters you see are empty, and this refers to the group of people that are included. And the others, what the others can do is basically nothing. They cannot read, they cannot write, and they cannot execute the file. For this directory here, only the user can read, write, and execute. So in order to change these permissions, you can use the change mode command, where you can use one of these letters, user, if you want to change the permission for the user and so on, and then use one of these 3 letters, reading, writing, and executing. So I can use that to modify the permissions of one file, for instance. So imagine that I want to change the permission of the previous file here. So I want to add the permission of executable here to the set sh history file. So what I can use is change mode u plus x, right? And otherwise, if I want to remove the permission of one file, I can use the change mode command, the letter for instance, U, and use the minus symbol and the permission that I want to remove. So you can use here plus or minus if you want to add or remove a permission. So now we can list the files in the folder. So then we need to move around, and it's not the same in Linux, especially on the terminal. So the command to move around is called the CD, which stands for change directory. And here we can use several options to move around. For instance, if we use CD and the name of the directory, then we will get to that directory. If you type only CD without any argument, then we will move to the home directory by default, right? CD minus is a shortcut for moving to the previous visited directory. And CD plus plus, CD dot dot will move you to the upper directory in the hierarchical tree. So very important. Sometimes one writes a long path to the current directory, and sometimes one gets confused where one is located. So the pwd command will print out the local name of the directory. So if you want to copy files from one place to the other, you can use the cp command. So in this case, we will copy the text.txt command to the folder called directory. Yes. And here one is assuming that directory is in the current directory. So this is a subfolder where you are working. So imagine that instead of a plain file, we want to copy a directory inside another directory. So in this case, we need to use the -r command, which stands for recursive way. Yes. So if you don't use the -r for a directory, it will show you an error message. So important message, be aware that in Linux, once you overwrite files and or delete them or yes, yeah, you cannot recover them in Linux. Yes, so be aware of these commands. So now imagine that you are in your folder and you want to create a file. So there are several ways to do that. And the easiest way, I would say, is by using the touch command. If you use touch and a name of a file, in this case, text.txt, this will create an empty file with this name. So notice that in Linux, we are not attached to a specific suffix, as in this case, txt, for applications. So for instance, you can call them text file .dxt, .dat instead of txt, and that is a plain text file. That's not the case as in Windows, where you need a specific suffix for the endings of the files of a specific software. So here is more flexible. So if you want to create a directory, then we use the makdir command and the name of the directory, and this will create the directory called test. So removing the files, if it is a plain text file, then the rm command will delete the file. But if it is a directory, then you need to use the -r command, which stands for recursive. And also, if for some reason you cannot remove the files, then you will need to add the forcing command. So again, be careful with this command because once you delete the files, you cannot recover them. So why is Linux very powerful? So in Windows, imagine that I generate a set of files for R, for instance, and I have 1,000 of files that I want to move from one place, one folder to another. So what I can do is that I select the files and then I just cut or copy and I paste. But it's not that convenient. For instance, I was trying to copy some pictures recently. Then I selected the files, and then something happened to my machine, and it crashed, right? So just selecting a bunch of files and transferring is can create some issues. Yeah. So this can be somehow um, undermined in Linux, because here there are several commands that allow you to do that on the terminal. And especially the wildcards allow you to work with many files at a time, but these files need to have some structure in their names, right? So some pattern. Uh, so the most frequent wildcards, I would say, are the question mark will represent a single character. The star will represent a string or character, which can be 0 characters or any number of characters. And these brackets, which can substitute the value of 1 digit from 0 to 9, or they can be used to substitute the value for one character from A to B, the capital. So for the file systems that we are using here at HPC2N, it's convenient to do a soft link to the project directory. So otherwise, every time you want to move to the project directory, which has a long name, you need to type it or to cut and paste from somewhere. So this command allows you to create the so-called a link file. And once you create this file, this will act as it is were the original file, but that is sitting in another location in the folder, a hierarchical tree. So for instance, here, my original file is called source.txt, and then I create a link file called link. And the good point is that once I modify this link file, then the changes will be reflected in the source file. So especially this is very convenient for the project directory, as I mentioned before, because it has a long name. So in addition to this, if you look at the permissions and the properties of this file, you will see that in the first letter it has an L, which stands for Softlink. Something powerful from the Linux command also is that it allows you to redirect the output. So this command here, greater than, allows you to redirect the output of the command that you are executing. For instance, in this example, the content of ls will be saved or redirected into this file test.dat, right? So if instead of writing a new file, you want to concatenate the output from the previous one, you can use this double greater than symbol. So instead of creating that, it will just concatenate the content. The the less than symbol will change the standard input. This command to and then the greater than redirects the standard error. So if you want to redirect the standard output on an error to a file, you can use this other command, this 2 greater than ampersand and 1. So both outputs will be directed, in this case, to the file that you write. For instance, log file. So sometimes I use this command. I will show you later on to write the output of the ml module load purge command, which is something that we recommend in the batch scripts. So piping. So in the piping, we can use the output of some command as the input for another command. For instance, here in this example, I'm using the command called grep, which searches for patterns in a file. In this case, I'm searching for the pattern string in the file.txt, right? So this command first will search for this pattern in this file, and the output will be sent to this other command called WC. And WC, what it does is that it counts the lines and the words in some file. So if I do that, I will count, or I will get statistics from the output of the grep command. So here I'm sending the output of grep command to the file.out, and in this case, I'm concatenating the output to the same file. Yep. Now, something that is very convenient for some software, for instance, Gromax or your own software that use the different number of parameters, yes, it's the environmental variables. So these environmental variables allow you to use a different value for parameters for your simulations, and you won't need to recompile your code every time that these parameters are changed. For instance, if you want to increase the number of workers or increase the number of threads in your code, you can leave it open in your source code, compile that, and when you are using that in your script, in your batch script, then you can just export that in the bash script and then change that. So this is very convenient. So editing the file, previously I showed you the nano editor, and I said that it's quite convenient when we are started in Linux because it has a few commands for editing the files. Here we can see that this hat dot or a caret dot allows you to write out the file. So if you press the Control O, it will write the file. Control W, it will look for some file, and so on. So you can also read the file, and when you are done with editing the file, you can type Control X, and this will exit the file. Now let me go to data handling. So if you want to compress a large database, you can use the gzip command and the name of the file, and this will create a file called file.gz, which is compressed. If you get some compressed file and you want to decompress it, you can use the gunzip command instead. And so imagine that you have a directory which has subfolders and many plain files, and you want to send that to your collaborator. So instead of transferring the files one by one through SCP, for instance, you can make a tarball with all these files and then just send the tarball to your colleague. So in order to generate a tarball, you can use tar -cbf command, the name of the file that you want .tar and the directory. And if you get a tarball, you can use the tar -xvf and the name of the tarball. You can also zip the tarball file to make it less heavy. So now, very important, how to log in to the cluster. So you can use the different methods, depends on the operating system that you're using. For instance, if you are sitting in Linux, there is a SSH command available, and here you type the username and the password that you got from HPC2N, not the one from Super. And then the name of the cluster. This was an old machine that we have here, but now this name is Kebnekaise.hpc2n.umeå.se. In case you want to enable some graphical application, for instance, MATLAB R, yes, then you can use the -xl command to display the graphical user interface. But there is a better option if you want to display some graphics, and this is called Softlink. This is in the important information that Birgitte sent you by email, and this is more convenient, I would say, because the applications run faster, right? So in SSH there is a lag time, and I haven't observed that with Softlink, but it's up to you. Transferring files, we can use the SFTP command if you are in Linux, for instance, or in my case, I use the WinSCP if I'm in Windows, or SCP if I'm on Mac. So once you are in SFTP, this is especially special for SFTP. Then you can get the files with the get command, and you can upload the files to Kebnekaise with the put command. Some tip: you can synchronize the content of your folder with the rsync command. This is quite convenient, and I used to do that frequently. So this allows you to synchronize the content of your folder that is sitting in Kebnekaise to the local folder where you do your backup, right? So rsync. These are only two options that I'm showing you here for rsync, and there are plenty depending on what is the goal of your synchronization. So you can also read the man pages for Rsync and take a look of all the options that it offers. So finding patterns. So this is also while Linux is very powerful, so it's good at patterns. So once the files have some structure, intrinsic structure, then it would be easy to manipulate that in Linux. One command that is used for searching patterns is the grep command. Here you stop the grep and the pattern that you want to find. In this case, I want to find the pattern word in the file called file, right? And it will list all the findings that are in the file. So grep also allows you to use more options, and something that I usually use are the -r recursive. I ignore the case. N is for the directory, I remember, and also the E is for the citing the lines, as far as I remember. There are several options that you can use for the grep command. So this will list all the files that contain the pattern word, for instance, that are included in some home directory, and we will use a recursive approach. Even if there are subfolders, it will try to find this pattern word in all the files. And that's very convenient. For instance, if you are developing a big code which contains several subfolders, plain files, and so on, and this will even give you the line number where it is found. Yeah. So you can also enhance the power of grep more. So there are many other options that you can use. Another command for finding patterns is the AWK, and the difference with grep is that AWK can do some operations on the found patterns. For instance, imagine that you want to extract one column from one file and then add the content of that column to another column in your file. Yes? So grep is a good option because it can do arithmetics with the patterns that it finds. So scripting, up to now we can type the commands on the terminal only, but imagine that you are doing some repetitive task. For instance, you find the content of the grep command, then you do the statistic with the word counter, WC, and then you apply some AWK, and you are doing that hundreds or thousands of times. So it will be not that convenient, and scripting will allow you to do this repetitive task in a more efficient way. So what is that? So we take a file and we put this shebang command here with the bin and bash location. And here we type all the commands that we want to execute. In particular here, I want to find the ABCD pattern in a PDB file. Then I redirect the output to this file here and use the content of this file as an input for my program that I wrote, right? And finally, I wrote the output of this entire command to this file here. So imagine that I'm repeating this task, yes, every time. So it's very inconvenient, cumbersome, I would say. So a better way is to collapse all these commands in a single file called analysis.sh, and then execute this file with the dot slash command. So if you try to do that, you will get an error if it is done for the first time, because as you remember, there are some file permissions, and in particular, as by default, this file called analysis.sh will not have the executable permission. You need to grant the file the executable permission, and you do that by using the change mode command with this option user, and then adding the permission, and then you can type, as I mentioned before, dot and slash analysis.sh, and it will execute all the command included in these files. So some recommendations when you're working on the terminal. It's not that convenient sometimes. Imagine that you are typing a long command, right? And then you discover that you made a mistake just at the beginning of the command. And it is not like in Windows, where you just take the mouse and you put that at the beginning of the line, and then you edit the command, and everything works fine. Now here you need to move the cursor with the arrow and then get to the first line. But if the command is so long, that could be cumbersome. So there are several shortcuts to work more efficiently with the Linux command line. And for instance, here I show you only 3. If you try Control A, this will take you to the beginning of the line. Control E will go to the end of the line, right? And Control L will clean the terminal if you want to remove all the output that you had. So there are more options that you can use, right? More shortcuts, but these are the most useful according to my point of view. So in Linux, every time that you type some command, this will be saved into a file called the history file. And if you take a look at your account when you log into Kebnekaise, you will see that there is a .bash history file, and then you will see all the commands that you have typed up to now. So there are some limitations in the number of lines that can be saved in the history file. And for instance, for me, this is not that convenient, because I would like to have all the commands that I type just from 1, 2, or more years. And one way to enhance the power of the history file is by using these options here, which will increase the number of lines that are saved, yes, and also will try to reduce the duplications. So these options can be saved in the .bash rc file, which is the configuration file for bash terminal. So at the beginning, I show you the ls minus lhrt command, which is long. It's not that long. There are other commands that you can create, and they could be very long. For instance, the grep command or other commands. And this command, for instance, will list only the directories in a certain folder. You can imagine how convenient is that. So if in the same folder you have plain files and several subfolders, and the number of plain files over exceed the number of directories, and you're trying to search for a single folder, that will be inconvenient. So this will list all the folders only in the directory. So you save this file in your bash rc command, bash rc file, and then the next time you log in, you will have this command available. So just type alt L there, and then it will list only the files. So this is called an alias. So some specific commands for the Kebnekaise terminal. Pro info will give you information about the usage of the projects that you are granted with. SQ minus A minus U and your username will show the status of all the jobs with this username. SBatch and the script name will submit the job to the queue. If you want to cancel the job, you need to use scancel and the job ID, which is the number that you get when you submit the job with the sbatch command. And finally, the quota command will give you information about the disk usage. So we have put this information in a cheat sheet, which you can download from this link here. Yes. And later on, you will try all these commands when you log in.